Okay. I don't know, maybe you can hear me, maybe not. I'm still working on all the clicks, and it looks like we're good enough to do this. I want to welcome everybody to the Gospel Truth tonight. I am your host, John Watson. I'm the preacher at the Westside Church of Christ in Indianapolis, Indiana. You're welcome to come visit us at 2675 Kentucky Avenue, Indianapolis, Indiana, 46221. That's our address. We would love to have you come and be with us and learn about what's going on. And I think you would just be absolutely amazed at what you can learn with such a good group of people. I want to take just a minute. We'll get started here briefly. But before that, I want to take just a minute to thank you so much for all the prayers that so many have offered for my wife and her illness. She's doing better. She's been fighting terrible, terrible vertigo. And we're just very thankful that she's feeling a little better, that although she's still dealing with it. So keep her in your prayers. We certainly appreciate that. I want to also say, give a big shout out to Scott Claft, who has been fighting very diligently, I might add, the coronavirus. So he is getting better. We're very thankful for that. He spent quite a while in the hospital battling that. So, brother, if you're listening, we love you, and we're very thankful that that you're on the mend, and we're going to continue to pray for you. Also, I want to give you a little info about something that's going to be taking place hopefully pretty soon. We're looking for a venue. We're trying to find a place somewhere in the Vincennes, Indiana area. Maybe at the Vincennes University. Definitely not at the, the public library. $1,200 a night? I don't think so. So anyway, we're looking for a place to hold a debate there with a guy named, who is a local preacher there in the area, Eric Gersbacher, I think is how you say his last name. So seems like to be a good enough guy. However, he's way off on eschatology, so we want to have a debate and discuss these issues like gentlemen, and that's exactly what we're going to do. Now, the interesting thing about this is it's not going to be your typical debate. It's going to be on a Saturday and a Sunday. Saturday night, I will be debating Eric. Sunday night or afternoon, whatever time we agree on, we don't have that worked out yet, Steve Baisden will be debating Eric. So we're going to do a tag team. He couldn't decide who he wanted to debate. I had made an offer, matter of fact, several months ago, and Eric nixed that at that point. I don't know what the reasons were. And then he said, "Don't worry, I haven't forgot you, brother." So I didn't let him forget about not forgetting about me, so I brought it back up. And he was talking about some things on a post that I made, which I'm going to comment on that in just a moment. And so anyway, here we go. And he and Steve are going back and forth. And, I need to, I do that too often. Nope, wrong one. There we go. That's the one. Alrighty. So he and Steve are going back and forth. And so anyway, that's just how it all came up. So that is in the works. We're going to try to do this just simply as soon as we possibly can. I don't know exactly when that will be, but I think it's going to be something that you do not want to miss. So it will be, if there's a way to do it, we will do it. And that is to live stream it as it's happening. At the very least, we will record it and upload it to YouTube, to my YouTube channel anyway. Which is, by the way, Restoration Movement 2.0. So you can go over there and subscribe. And you can see a lot of the videos that I've done over the years. The last few years. 4 years, I guess, we're going on doing these videos. I also want to say this. See, there's so many things that I got to catch up with. So this has been, 3 weeks or so since I've been able to do a program. Or maybe it's going on a month. I don't remember now. So, all these people are just coming at me from all these different directions. And lo and behold, you got this guy. His name is Scott Russell, and he is just all over me because of a title that I put in. It might have been the last show that I did. I really don't remember. And I haven't even finished that. I'll do 2 or 3 or more, or 10 over time, I'm sure, over that. But I had made a comment about, or I put it in the tagline that, how did I put it? No atoning blood on the cross, or something like that. And I just looked at that, and I didn't realize that I put an exclamation point in there. At least I don't. At this point, I don't remember doing that, but I did, obviously. And boy, oh boy, oh boy, here's just how these guys operate. They take what you say, and they're masters. These are people in the Church of Christ. It's pretty sad. They're supposed to be Christians, and they do everything they can to misrepresent you. And I'm going to show you why in just a minute. Why do they want to misrepresent you? Well, here's the reason. Because they can't answer the questions, and what they're saying doesn't make sense, and it's old, and it's tired, and it's antiquated lies, or misinformation, or mistruth, or error, however you want to put it. It's one of those, depending on who it comes from. So they don't deal with these things. They have to twist things. Now, I know good and well, and I actually even said in the video, of course you never hear him quote me on it, but I even said in the video it was pretty much just for shock value to get people to watch the video. So do I believe in the blood of Christ? Absolutely, I do. But there's some things that I have come to understand based on my studies, that the blood of Christ is a whole lot more than that physical red stuff that came out of his body. It's a whole lot more than that. And to deny that is just crazy. So, but it's a learning process, and it's taken me lots of time. I'm gonna say hey to a few people, so I gotta kind of move my screen here so I can see who we got so far. Looks like Tim Ogles is with us, and Bobby Allison. Great to have y'all with us. Bobby Allison understands y'all, but Tim used y'all too. So the difference between a southern y'all and a northern y'all is probably the apostrophe. I guess. I don't know. Oh, that hurts. Pulled a muscle coughing yesterday, so apologize about that. Dusty Rose, great to have you with us. And see Mark T. Robbins, the one and only Mark T. Robbins. There might be more, but Mark's the guy. And I want to say hey to you. And I think you had made a comment. Why not use our building? Well, we might. That is a last option. But I told him I would go to him. I would come to him, and so I'm going to try to, as much as possible, I'm going to try to do that. My wonderful wife is watching. I know that, so we're glad to have her and Tim Ogles there again, and Billy Williams there. Hey, brother, glad to see you live. Well, glad to see you anyway. I know you're live because you were commenting on that post. So, and we got Bill Evans, Milford Evans, as his, as AKA, also known as. So we're glad to have all of you here. And go to my page. Okay, on my page, what do I do with my phone? On my page, I made a post. And on this post, it says, if I can find it, here we go. It's coming. I can feel it in my bones. Maybe. Well, I don't know. What's this all about here? Let's try this. Okay, I can still feel it in my bones. It's coming up. It's coming up. Oh, hey, there's me live. Okay, so it says right here. It's one of these pink ones right there. It says, okay, Church of Christ preachers, raise your hand if you, like many others, are leaning towards preterism. So at current, it looks like it's at 642 comments. I did that. Was that last night? I think, yeah, that was last night that I did that. So we're at about 24 hours now. And it's just amazing all of the things that people bring up. And I love this, and I'm sure we'll go through this in the debate because this is just what people do. Well, why are you married? You preterists, you're not supposed to be married. I got news for them. if they really want to go that route, they're the ones that shouldn't be marrying because just whatever. Why do you take the Lord's Supper? I'm not going to spend all night on those. Why do you take the Lord's Supper? I got news for you all. And most of these people were in the Church of Christ. And one of the reasons I made that post is because there are a lot of Church of Christ preachers who are out there waiting in the wings. And I don't know what they're waiting for, but they see the fact that preterism is true and right. And I can tell you this because I have spoken to them. I'm not going to list names and all that. You know, I wouldn't do that. But I have spoken to them. Steve has spoken to them. Holger has spoken to them. And they're out there. They're waiting in the wings. And here's something else that's amazing. We are watching the transformation of the Church of Christ doctrine. We're watching it transform right before our eyes. Our Church of Christ preachers are now so desperate to answer us that they believe that Jesus was the only one that did not know the day or the hour. Terry Wayne Benton, for example, and others, but he harps on this a lot, so he calls me out, I'll call him out. Believes that the 1,000 years was literal. I read a post. I don't know where it was. Oh yeah, I do, but I'm not going to mention it because if you're going to go to that website that has the sinking ship on it, don't even bother. They're going to Lance Conley you there. It's they're dishonest, and it's just don't give them the time of day. If you want to discuss things, there are plenty of other sites with more honorable men than run that one. Anyway, so they've got to where they're teaching that 1,000 years is actually literal, and it's a large period of time. Now, does anybody else have a problem with that when Matthew chapter 24 and verse 36 is the traditional, this is what the traditional teaching is on verse 36. Not only the churches of Christ, but so many others also, that nobody knows the day or the hour when Jesus will return. Isn't that what it says? And by the futurist paradigm, that has to mean that nobody knows. Not even Jesus, only the Father. Now, we've got great explanation for that. We can go back to the scriptures. We can illustrate where that comes from. We can show you from Zechariah chapter 14 that is coming at the time of the end of Jerusalem. Zechariah 12, 13, and 14. And maybe we'll get a little more into that as we progress through our hour here tonight. But get the picture? They're so desperate to answer us, they're now changing the time-honored beliefs. And it's like, oh, no, it never happened. It's like the government telling you that all of this that's going on is okay. Hey, trust the government. I'm from the government. Trust me. All you got to do is believe what I say. And that's what they do. They say, believe this, and this is what we've always taught and what we've always believed. I'm going to tell you what the Lord's church has always believed. And it's not that the 1,000 years was a literal period of time, which Terry Wayne Benton and many of the others are now teaching and preaching. Terry said at the end of 1,300 years, Satan was released. Really, how are you going to square that with the fact that the Church of Christ teaches that there won't be any signs? It's just, boom, it's going to happen. And the trumpet sounds and out of the blue. And then, the sky rolls back and Jesus is riding his cloud down to the somewhere between heaven and earth. And you guys, you're embarrassing yourself. I'm just telling you, you're embarrassing yourself. We're going to go through some things that illustrate why people are coming to preterism. Now, preterism, let's define this for those who may not understand what preterism is. Preterism is the study of the end time things, or things of the end. Not the end of time, but the time of the end might be the better way to put it. We can read passages like in Daniel chapter 12. Matter of fact, let's go and let's look at Daniel chapter 12. And let me show you here something. This is pretty interesting. If you're reading in the New American Standard, like I use, then you're going to read things like the end of time. It literally says the end of time. Well, the problem is it should be the time of the end. And it actually footnotes that as you read there through Daniel chapter 12. You start in the first verse. And you're going to see that he explains that all of these events are to take place, and you're talking about the coming of the Lord, you're talking about the resurrection, judgment. Obviously, those three things go hand in hand, and they come at the time that Jerusalem is destroyed, at the time of the 3.5 years, the times and the half a time, the time when the power of the holy people is completely shattered. And Daniel 12, if you want to understand preterism, outlines what we believe. That the Lord comes at the destruction of Jerusalem with his angels for judgment and resurrection. And that's it. And then from that point, victory is made, which is one of the things that hopefully I'll get to, talking about the victory and why preterism is so appealing. Preterism is appealing to people who are willing to open their hearts and their minds to the first century truth. Preterism is appealing because it's powerful. Preterism is appealing because it answers questions. Now, here's one of the questions that preterism answers. If you are familiar with the teaching of Luke chapter 16, many will say, because of the teaching of Luke chapter 16 with the rich man and Lazarus, that means Hades is still around. Well, I can tell you this much. At the time that Jesus spoke those words and told and said what he said and was teaching what he was teaching, it was around. But let's examine this. Okay, in Luke chapter 16, ready for this? You start in verse 19. We're not going to read all of it. But, matter of fact, listen, I'll just explain it for time's sake so we can move on to some other things. But in Luke chapter 16, you see the rich man's alive and Lazarus is alive, and they both die. The rich man lifts up his eyes being in torment, and Lazarus awakens in the bosom of Abraham after the angels carry him there to be comforted. Now, people believe, and this is a standard teaching in the Church of Christ, in the pulpit. Okay? Now, I have to make this distinction. In many of the churches of Christ, they believe and they teach in the pulpit. And if the preacher or the elders are around, the members will say, yeah, well, when you die, you go to the Hadean realm. But I'm telling you, the guy standing in the back of the building at the end of the service, when the sermon has been preached on Luke 16, you want to know what they're saying? I've heard them do it many times. They're saying, I really don't think that. I think you go to heaven when you die. And they're 100% right about that. Because Hades has been destroyed. And that's what Terry Wayne Benton tries to explain away with the 1,000 years from Revelation chapter 20. He's got so many problems with that, he doesn't even get it. Which is sad, because he's a very good intellect, no question about that. But he's protecting a paradigm, as so many do, that is unprotectable. So anyway, that's the story. So they want to say, well, that means that when we die, we go to wait in the Hadean realm. But let me illustrate something to you. If you look at Matthew chapter 16, in Matthew chapter 16, this is why people are coming to preterism, because it answers these questions. The guy standing at the back of the church after the sermon on Luke 16, saying, well, I don't know why, but I think you go to heaven when you die. I remember studying this was not long after I started preaching at where I'm at now, which was full-blown futurist. I was, they were. And I remember saying one time in class that I'm convinced that you go to heaven when you die. And one of the things that made me see that was Revelation chapter 6, because you had the souls under the altar in heaven. So my thought was, now I understand this differently, but my thought back then was, how can you have these people in heaven that are being told by God to wait just a little bit longer? That means people must go to heaven when they die. So, I saw that there. Now, I explain that differently now, and I see it a little differently, but it still begs you to look at it closer, and I do too. Now, do you go to heaven when you die? Well, you have to. If heaven is not open, Jesus was not victorious. Let's explore this for just a moment. I asked you to look at Matthew chapter 16 and verse 18. Ready for this? I say to you that you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. So what's Jesus going to build? Is there any question as to what Jesus has the blueprints for in his hand? Or metaphorically. It's the church, okay? Then he says, and the gates of, if you're reading the many other translations, uses the word hell. That is not there. And it is the incorrect word, and it is simply meant to deceive you. I'm firmly convinced of that there are many things that the translators of these versions have put in there to protect their paradigm. Now, the New American Standard got it right here. They used the actual word that was used in the Greek. So if we can't trust these texts that go back as far as they do, then what do we have? Did the Holy Spirit not preserve them for us? I think so. But check this out. And the gates of Hades will not overpower it. Now, let's just stop right there. So here's what Jesus said. When the church is built, Hades has no power against it. That's what it says. That's what Jesus says. When I build my church, Hades has no power. Well, what's the power of Hades? The power of Hades is to suck you in and keep you there until the coming judgment. So let me illustrate this. Turn to Hosea. Hosea chapter 13 and verse 14 is what this is. And I want to show you this. And I want you to mark these things in your Bible. If you look at Hosea 13 and verse 14, it says, shall I ransom them from the power of Sheol? Sheol is Hades. Sheol is the Hebrew word. Hades is the Greek word. Shall I ransom them from the power of Sheol? Shall I ransom them from death? Sheol and death, Hades and death are very synonymous. About half the times that it's used in the Old Testament, you see it used as Sheol and death. Death and Hades. O death, where are your thorns? O Sheol, where is your sting? Now, this is quoted in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. That's what, about verse 52 or 55, something like that. So anyway, so it's quoted there. So what on earth is he talking about? Think about this. Look at verse, just I don't know, how much time do I have here? We'll go back to verse 1 anyway. So when Ephraim, this is Hosea 13. When Ephraim spoke, there was trembling. He exalted himself in Israel, but through Baal he did wrong and died, and now they sin more and more and make for themselves molten images, idols skillfully made. Now, I'm here to tell you this, that you should link this with Deuteronomy chapter 32, about the time in their latter years when they get to this point where they become extremely corrupt. Josephus even made mention of that the Jews of his generation, which he lived at the time of Christ, were the most corrupt generation of Jews ever. And that's stating something. Coming from someone who is supposed to be teaching them and showing them the right way. Now, it says there in verse 6 that they forgot Yahweh, they forgot who he was. Look at verse 9. It is your destruction, O Israel, that you are against me, against your help. Now, where now is your king, verse 10, that he may save you in all your cities and your judges of whom you requested. He's going over their history. He's like, you wanted all this stuff. Where are they at? They can't save you from me. They can't save you from this judgment that's coming. He says, I gave you a king in my anger, and I took him away in my wrath. Now look at verse 12. Now the iniquity of Ephraim is bound up. His sin is stored up. The pains of childbirth come upon him. Jesus is drawing off this childbirth motif in Matthew chapter 24, about verse 8. So when the pains of childbirth come, guess what? This is the church age. This is when the new covenant is coming in, being established. And it took time, just like the old covenant did. It took time. And then he goes on to say, Verse 14, shall I ransom them from the power of Sheol? No. Let me finish reading verse 13. The pains of childbirth come upon him. He is not a wise son, for it is not the time that he should delay at the opening of the womb. Well, what is this? When's the childbirth? When the church is built. Verse 14, shall I ransom them from the power of Sheol? Shall I redeem them from death? When is this taking place? Oh, well, according to the new teaching, this teaching is nothing but modern day traditional Church of Christ. Okay? The 1,000 years is literal, but it's figurative. It's a literal 1,000 years, but it's figurative for the time afterwards. It was literal for the first 1,000, but it's figurative for whatever time's remaining after that. Come on. That's not what it says. See, here's the problem. So many people do not understand, and this is why people are coming to preterism. So many people do not get the fact that you have to go back and establish everything in the New Testament with the Old. There's nothing new in the New Testament. Everything in the New Testament essentially is foretold. I'm not talking about all the little nuances and everything, but it's foreshadowed in the Old Covenant. And it's there for a reason. And if you were to study the 7 feasts, and most people refuse to do this, you start seeing why they did what they did in the New Testament, because they were following those 7 feasts. The 7 feasts were to herald the coming Messiah. So for 1,500 years, they practiced these things every year. Not a generation of the Jews passed that didn't practice the 7 feasts. They didn't practice Passover, first fruits. I get to thinking and talking, and anyway. Anyway. Passover, unleavened bread, first fruits, and then Pentecost. Okay? And now those foreshadowed the coming of Messiah and his messianic work and the beginning of the church, the opening pages of the new covenant, you might say. Not the entire thing, because that while the new covenant was becoming fully mature, the old covenant was on life support and it was dying. That's the beginnings of the church. Nobody's going to dispute that. Nobody's going to dispute Hosea 13 is the beginning of the church. Well, when you have the church being fully established and the birth taking place, not just the opening of the womb, but you have the ransom from the power of Sheol. What was the power of Sheol? Sheol separated you from God because of Adamic sin. The sin that Adam committed where he died. What was that death? It was not physical death. Just really? You want to go there? Physical death? Yeah, Adam died physically the day that he ate there, but it was 930 years later. That's exactly why people like Terry Wayne Benton and so many other preachers, in their desperation, can say, well, the 1,000 years is literal and metaphorical, figurative. The first 1,000 years is literal. After that, hey, you got 1,000 years worth of time that Jesus could not come, and Jesus would have been the only one that didn't know it, because the people in the first century that were not Bible scholars or even inspired at all knew it, but Jesus didn't. It's a big problem for you all. Can't wait to deal with that one in debate. So Sheol, according to Matthew chapter 16 and verse 18, going back to Hosea, is illustrating that when the church is fully established and the old law is fully gone, then guess what? Heaven is opened. It's that simple. Hades does not prevail against the church. You got that? If the church has been established, as most people proclaim, in the churches of Christ today, then guess what? Oh, I did not mean to do that. Sorry, I'm trying to deal with my screen here. This really is not easy for me to do this technology stuff. So anyway, it's just that simple. If the church has been fully established, then you have to understand that Hades is destroyed and heaven is open, because Hades does not prevail against the church. Hades can, if you're a part of the Lord's body, according to Ephesians 3, 26 and 27, you're clothed in Him, you are in Him, then guess what? You're where He is. Where is He? He's not in Hades. I actually had a preacher in the Church of Christ tell me that Jesus is in Hades. Well, He's there spiritually. It's okay for them to say He's there spiritually, but it's not okay for us to talk about the spiritual sacrifice. That's basic Bible 101. There's a spiritual sacrifice that Jesus made according to Isaiah chapter 54 and many other places. Paid when in His soul. Just read it. Now, let's talk about something else. Why are people all over seeing it? Why are they seeing preterism? Why are they coming to preterism? Well, I can tell you why this is. It's because it's very powerful. I just gave you one illustration of the power of the preterist point of view. And it is simply this. It answers these questions that the men, and I think, and I was taught as I was growing up, I grew up in the church that I'm preaching at now. It was full futurist, without question. They were hyper-futurists and just as legalistic as any Church of Christ could be. They taught me so many things. And I love these men because they were good men. Other than the fact that they didn't understand the truth. But they taught me so many things that were wrong, that literally pushed people away from the truth, not drew them into it. But anyway, so I'm preaching at that church now. It's odd, isn't it? That's the power of the gospel. About half of our congregation at the time saw it. The other half ran from it. And that's typically the reaction. It's called cognitive dissonance. Well, what that means is you see something in right in front of you, and you cannot deny it. Your eyes can't deny it. Your brain processes it as the truth on one side of your brain, but on the other side of your brain, it hurts because your brain is saying, no, that cannot possibly be true. This isn't how I was taught. I wasn't raised this way. So when someone comes to you and they say to you, well, Jesus promised to return in the first century, and He did. That's exactly what He said. Well, how do you deal with that? The way that you deal with it is you're going to have to do some prayer. You're going to have to do some study. But if the first thing that you do when you come across a difficult subject is you run to your preacher so your preacher can tell you what to believe, you will wind up believing a lie generally. I'm not saying that everything that preachers say or do is a lie, but a great deal of it is. That's a real problem. That's a huge problem. So, let's continue on with this. But it doesn't have to be a problem, okay? So people are seeing the truth of preterism, and they are, they're coming to it. Now, let's see here. What's going on? Okay. I gotta check things here, make sure it's working. Okay, looks like we're okay. Let me check out YouTube here real quick. Brent Bishel, hey. Want to say, hey there, brother. Absolutely loving Norm's comments. Let me say this real quick. Okay, so Brent Bishel, he's viewing on YouTube. YouTube generally has a better feed, but not as many comments. But anyway, he was in a video debate with a preacher in the Church of Christ named Norm Fields. Norm Fields simply quit. Okay, got it? He quit the debate. And he reverted to this, well, you'll have to answer these 4 questions, or I don't remember how many it was, before we go any further. No, that's not the rules of a debate. You see, this is why we want live, physical, oral, written, or not written, structured debates. Because it forces them in front of everybody to stick to the rules. And they all the time say, well, it's the preterists that don't stick to the rules. Well, let me point something out. Usually the people who are screaming the loudest about something are the ones that are doing it themselves. And that's exactly what happened there. So this is one of the reasons we try to do these debates, because it forces these guys, it holds their feet to the fire. If you say you're going to be a gospel preacher, then guess what? You have to step up to it. Since I made that post, I cannot tell you the amount of preachers I have who have asked me just in the last 24 hours. Well, what's the difference? I don't see any reason in teaching this. Well, then you're not a gospel preacher. At least you're not preaching the whole counsel of God, because it's the truth. And if the truth doesn't matter to you, then don't preach it. But don't call yourself a gospel preacher, especially one that's emulating the New Testament church, because this is what they believed. They believed that Jesus was coming in their lifetime, and for lots of reasons. Still there in Matthew chapter 16, when Jesus says the church is coming, it's going to be built in a very short period of time, right? They knew that. He prophesied it. He said, Peter, I'm giving you the keys to the kingdom. What's the kingdom? The kingdom is heaven. What is the keys? It's the gospel. What is the responsibility of the church? To preach the gospel. Why? To save people's souls. Why? So they can go to heaven, not be separated because of Adam's sin. Now, that was accomplished when Jesus was victorious. Now, if you don't think Jesus was victorious and you go on ahead and preach that you are separated from God still, and still in the sin of Adam, because Jesus and his blood sacrifice that they want to harp so much about was not strong enough to fix the problem. So in that same chapter of Matthew chapter 16, look at verse 24. Now, what's he doing here? Is he changing anything? Has gears changed? Has the theme changed? Has the timing changed? No. He's talking about dying. Look at verse 21. We'll get there in just a minute. From that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and the chief priests and the scribes, and be killed and be raised up on the third day. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, God forbid it, Lord. This shall never happen to you. But he turned and said to Peter, Get behind me, Satan, for you are a stumbling block to me, for you are not setting your mind on God's interests, but man's. So there's the issue. And people today are doing the exact same thing. You're not setting your mind on God's interest, but on man's. And it's God's timing, not yours. If God wants Jesus to return in the first century, yay! It is his prerogative and his sovereignty to be able to will it so. I have nothing to say about that. All I can do is preach and teach the truth. I saw what happened to Jonah. I'm not going to do that. At least not intentionally. Okay, so let's get back to Matthew 16. So Jesus is saying, verse 18, the church, when it's built, okay, he says, I will build my church, not lay the foundation, and then the building's done. No, when it's done, then Hades no longer prevails against the church. Once the church is built. Now, if you're going to go with that being on the day of Pentecost, then you have heaven coming sooner than I do. And I know they don't want to go there. Verse 24, Matthew 16. I really am, guys, trying to pay attention to my YouTube feed too. When I add more venues, social media sites, I'm going to have 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 to switch back and forth to. But anyway, Brent and Forget Me Not and Kaziv Bodesi, maybe? Anyway, glad that you're watching. I don't ever want to try to botch anybody's name. But I have enough respect for you to give it a shot. So anyway. Matthew 16, verse 24. Jesus said to his disciples, "If anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me." Is there any question as to who he's talking to and what he's telling them and when they're going to have to do it? He just told them about these things. Okay? So what's changed? Verse 25. Whoever wishes to save his life will lose it. Oh, wait a minute. No, let me back up. I'm going to read that again. For a generation, 1,000 years and longer, if they wish to save their life, they'll lose it. Is that what it says? No. He's talking to them. He says, listen, whoever wishes to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. What had he just been talking about to them? I'm going to die. You're going to die. We're all going to die for this faith. It's this persecution that's coming. For what shall it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? How in this scenario is this man in verse 26 going to gain his soul? By denouncing or renouncing Christ or God or that plan. Oh, you gained your life, but you gave up your soul. Let's keep reading. Or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul? For, what's he talking about here? Is this a new thought? Is it set in a different time period? The context is them, then, and there. So what's the context of verse 27? For the Son of Man is, look it up, it should be about to come in the glory of his Father with his angels, and will then repay every man according to his deeds. Let that soak in. Okay, this is why people are coming to preterism, because it answers the questions. Jesus said to these people, he had just been talking about all these events that are going to take place in their lifetime. They're going to pay the price, and he says, for, is that looking at least 1,000 years in the future? Well, no, remember, Jesus didn't know that. Jesus was the only one that was unaware it would be at least 1,000 years. Everybody else knew it except Jesus. Or was he saying, did he actually say, the Son of Man is about to come in the glory of his Father with his angels? Okay, is this Judgment Day? Of course it is. Jesus coming on the clouds for judgment with his angels? The glory of his Father is coming on the clouds. The glory of his Father is coming in judgment. The glory of the Father is all of those things. And he says everybody's going to repay, or then he will repay every man according to his deeds. That's Judgment Day. And he did just say that Judgment Day is coming in their lifetime. What about verse 28? Oh, well, since it's a different paragraph, really. You know, there were no paragraphs in the original writing. Truly I say to you, there are some of those who are standing here who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. He is not distinguishing anything. Now, remember, when the Son of Man comes in his kingdom, what is that? What's the kingdom? Matthew 13 proclaims the kingdom is heaven. How many times does Matthew 13? Let me show you this. Matthew 13. Ready for this? He says in the parable of the mustard seed, starts out small, grows big, that's heaven. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed. The kingdom of heaven is like leaven. The kingdom of heaven may be compared to a man, verse 24, who sowed good seed, so on. Get it? The kingdom of heaven, it's the kingdom that is heaven. That's being opened. There's been so much controversy over, well, the kingdom is actually this and that. The reason there's controversy over it is because they don't understand when the kingdom comes. They think the kingdom came on the day of Pentecost. It did. It had a beginning there. But it was not mature. If it was, then Jesus was totally wrong in his parables, because he said the kingdom of heaven starts as a small mustard seed and grows into something big. Now, how long does that take? Is that at the blink of an eye? As soon as you put the seed in the ground, poof, it's full grown? No, it takes time. That's what it was. Okay, now, in verse 28, truly I say to you, there's some of those who are standing here who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. He said, and kept it in context, at least back to verse 24, and all of it is in context, and he says, judgment is about to take place, and some of you standing here will be alive to see it when I come in my kingdom. When Jesus comes the second time to open heaven and it be full and complete, what is that? That's the second coming of the Lord. And when did he say it would take place? In their lifetime. Now here's an issue. So many people today want to dichotomize this, and they say, well, verse 27 is talking about Judgment Day in the future. No, it doesn't. But that's what they say. And then verse 28, well, that's the transfiguration. I want to go there. Because that's what happens next in the next chapter. No, he wasn't talking about something that's going to happen 6 or 7 days later. He was talking about something that would happen in their lifetime. How many of them had died by the time they had got to 6 or 7 days later at the transfiguration? None of them. This does not apply to them. It's not the transfiguration. Well, maybe this is the day of Pentecost. Only one of them had died, and he had killed himself, and he wasn't killed because of persecution, unless you count himself persecuting himself. Doesn't fit. Doesn't fit at all. These are some of the things that preterism answers. Now, I want to move on and cover a couple other things. Preterism is the power of the gospel. If you're trying to preach the gospel without preaching that all things, listen to this, if you're trying to preach the gospel without saying or teaching or illustrating that all things have been fulfilled, you are leaving out the power of the gospel. Could Paul have given the testimony of Jesus without fulfilled prophecy? Nope. So if Paul couldn't teach Jesus and Jesus being Messiah without fulfilled prophecy in the first century, can we do it today? We got people trying to convince other people that Jesus was Messiah. He's the Savior. He's the Anointed One. And never once do they use fulfilled prophecy. How are you going to prove that? You can't. Now, Paul in the first century was preaching and teaching as Jesus did and as the other apostles did, that Jesus would soon return in their lifetime. Now, how could he do that? Because that prophecy was yet to be unfulfilled, was yet unfulfilled. Because he said, he appealed to the scriptures. And if you go to, let me show you a few of these things here. Okay, Acts 17. Okay, so if you look at Acts 17, what did Paul do in Acts 17? To the Thessalonians, what did he do? He appealed to the scriptures. Well, they wanted to kill him, most of them. So he had to flee. And then when he goes to Berea, what does he do? He says that they received the word with great eagerness, examining the scriptures. What scriptures? It wasn't the New Testament. No more with the Bereans than it was with the Thessalonians. It was this old covenant. The scriptures. And he was appealing to prophecy. Just go forward to Acts chapter 24. Notice what Paul said in Acts chapter 24, verse 14. But this I admit to you, that according to the way, that's the church, which they call a sect, these are Christians. I do serve the the God of our fathers, believing everything that is in accordance with the law and that is written in the prophets. Huh? He said, I believe everything that's written in the law and according to the prophets. What is he talking about? Fulfilled prophecy. And that which was to shortly be fulfilled. Because what you have to understand, if you understand the prophets, you understand that Messiah comes, and then a short while later, he comes again to complete everything. He doesn't wait 1,000 years. He doesn't even wait 100 years. He told them when he would come. Jesus was not in the dark. Maybe about the specific day and hour. Of course, that's a whole other series, but he knew when it would be, and it would be at the destruction of Jerusalem, be fulfilled by then. When? In their lifetime. But anyway, Acts chapter 24, let me continue showing this to you. And verse 15, he says, having a hope in God, which these men cherish themselves, that there is about to be, look it up, it should be about to be, a resurrection of both the righteous and the wicked. That's Daniel 12. That's John 5. That's every prophecy about the resurrection. Ezekiel 37. It's every prophecy. So when he's talking about the prophets, either the prophets disagree or they all, and they've all got their own conception of what the resurrection is going to be and the coming of the Lord and all these things, or they agree. Well, the prophets had to agree. The prophets had to agree because they stood in the counsel of Yahweh. They were inspired, and that's a powerful thing. So they're not allowed to be wrong. Deuteronomy chapter 18 says, if you've got one of these guys who prophesies and it doesn't come true, don't be afraid of him because he's not a true prophet. Matter of fact, he should be stoned to death. Now, what was Jesus saying back there in Matthew chapter 16? He's coming in their lifetime. Guys, that is the power of the gospel. Prophecy fulfilled is the power of the gospel. Prophecy unfulfilled has no power. None. Don't believe these guys. Revelation chapter 19 and in verse 10. I'm going to show you this. The latter part of that says the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. Now let me ask you this. What is the testimony of Jesus? What's the spirit of prophecy? What's the spirit of prophecy? Just making a prophecy and it never comes true and then people just keep waiting and waiting and waiting? That cannot happen because Jesus clearly stated it would be in his lifetime. The Old Testament prophets clearly stated that it would happen at the coming of Messiah, when the church is built. Many other things. It cannot be 1,000 years later. Well, it's part literal and part figurative. Can't be that. Simply cannot be that. Now, let's think about something else. In Ephesians chapter 3, guys, this is the power of the gospel. This is why people are coming to preterism. Now, preterism is just one word to describe an entire system of thought, and it's that study of past fulfillment. That's pretty much it. The simplest way to put it, of all things being fulfilled. The Greek word is I think taken from eschaton, and that's how it's used in the New Testament. And this is the climactic end, which was prescribed for their time, not ours. Not the climactic end at the end of time, but a climactic end at the time of the end, which was the end of that oppressive law of Moses that pointed out that you were separated from God. And when was that taken out of the way? When you're no longer separated from God anymore. When you no longer had Hades or Sheol to be your prison to hold you for millennia until Messiah would come. So, Ephesians chapter 3 says, So, yeah, there's probably way too much here to go through and read all this, but he's essentially talking about what he was doing, preaching to the Gentiles, preaching the gospel to the Gentiles. He's talking about that time when the mystery is taken out of the way. It's no longer hidden. And then in verse 10 he says, so that the manifold wisdom of God may be made known through the church to the rulers and the authorities in the heavenly places. This was in accordance, now listen to this, with the eternal purpose which he carried out in Christ Jesus our Lord, in whom we have boldness and confident access through faith in him. What's the eternal purpose of Jesus? Just to save people for a few thousand years and be done with it? Or was it an eternal purpose? Listen to this. Look at verse 20. Now to him who is able to do far more abundantly above all that we ask or think, according to the power that works within us, to him be the glory in the church and in Christ Jesus to all generations forever and ever. Or if you're reading the King James, if you love that version, what about this? World without end. Well, what's the world that's without end? Is it this physical planet? Well, that's obvious because the scriptures teach us that the world will have no end. It's not going to be physically blown up, physically destroyed. One generation comes and another goes, but the earth abides forever. Ecclesiastes chapter 1 and verse 4. I love the futurist explanation for that. But it says what it says. And there's not one single passage. As a matter of fact, this is how people like Terry Wayne Benton and many of the other preachers who are so bent on whatever they have to do, however they, by hook or by crook, they're going to prove us wrong, and it's usually by crook. But this is the reason that people like Terry Wayne Benton can come up with a half literal, half figurative 1,000 years. It's because they don't believe what God says when he says it. Genesis chapter 8, I think it's verse 20 or something like that. Yahweh promised, I will never again curse the ground on account of man. Yeah, but he never said that he wasn't going to burn it with fire. He tells you he's never again going to curse the ground on account of man. And he didn't even burn it. He just got it really wet. And he says, I'm never going to curse the ground again. Not with water, not with anything. And he goes on to say, I will never again kill every living thing as I have done. Are you going to make that part literal and part figurative? You're going to add to that? Well, he didn't say, when it comes to the Lord's Supper, he didn't say that you can't use, a Big Mac and fries and a Coke. Well, I don't want to use Big Mac fries and a Coke. Some people might, but we don't. Because it's specified. He said what he said, and that's the authority of Yahweh and Yeshua, God and Jesus, to state it. Now, Ephesians 3 teaches there will be no end to this new covenant. There will be no end to evangelism. That is very much in line with what the scriptures teach, what the prophets teach. Let's go back to Daniel for just a moment. Wow, where'd that time go? But let me show you this real quick. Daniel chapter 9. Ready for this? Verse 24. 70 weeks have been decreed for your people and your holy city to finish the transgression, to make an end of sin, to make atonement for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. Now, when does this take place? Well, some of it's happened already, but some of it's still ready to happen. Listen to this. To finish the transgression. All of these things take place at the time of finishing the transgression. At the time when the atonement is made. Making an end of sin. It's the time when everlasting righteousness is brought in. It's the time when vision and prophecy are sealed up. All of those things are prescribed to take place when Jerusalem is destroyed as being the evidence that they have taken place. Jesus said there will be signs in the heavens. It's what translations say. But there will be signs in heaven. That's the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. When all those things take place. That's what he said in Matthew 24. When you see these things, this is what this means. Now, so because they had been taught that, and then someone comes along, a couple guys, actually there were three, maybe four, who came along and they said, the resurrection's already taken place. And their faith was upset. 2 Timothy chapter 2. So their faith was upset because of the teaching of Hymenaeus and Philetus. Well, why was their faith upset? Because Jesus had told them, when you see these things take place, you know that the resurrection has taken place. Paul taught them, when these events take place, when the trumpet sounds, the last trump sounds, to them, they would have understood the feast. They would have plugged that in immediately, the Feast of Trumpets. That's what it's for. It's for national repentance. It's a time when you're humbled. It's a time when the atonement takes place. And that happens at the coming of the Lord. That's the last three feasts. Trumpets, atonement, and the Feast of Tents, booths. That's when Yahweh comes down to dwell with us. So, preterism answers these questions. So, how long is the church going to preach and teach? Let me show you this. We're still in Daniel. It's never going to end. There's other passages, but I'm just going to show it to you from here. Look at Daniel chapter 12. At that time, Michael the great prince, who stands guard over the sons of your people, will arise, and there will be a time of distress, such as never occurred since there was a nation until that time. And at that time, your people, everyone who is found written in the book, will be rescued. Many of those who sleep in the dust of the ground will awake, these to everlasting life, but others to disgrace and everlasting contempt. What do you suppose that is? So Michael comes. Dead people rise, some to life, some to death. It's the resurrection. Verse 3. Those who have insight will shine brightly like the brightness of the expanse of heaven, and those who lead the many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. Evangelism continues after the resurrection. When does the resurrection take place? If you look at verse 7, I heard a man dressed in linen who was above the waters of the river. As he raised his right hand and his left toward heaven, and swore by him who lives forever that it would be for a time, times, and half a time, as soon as they finish shattering the power of the holy people, all these events will be completed. What's the power of the holy people? The power of the holy people was the law. The law was imperfect, but it was their power. Romans 3 illustrates that. I think it's Romans 3:5. Great in every respect is that the Jews were entrusted with the oracles of God. It was their power. So here you've got all of these events taking place when the power of the holy people is shattered. So when is that? At the destruction of Jerusalem. That's the time, times, and half a times. But if you want to say, well, this is talking about when the law was nailed to the cross. We need a whole lot more time for this, but I've covered this recently, I think. When the law was nailed to the cross and taken out of the way. Okay, then you want the resurrection of the just and the unjust and judgment taking place at the cross? You're going to have an awful hard time proving that from the scriptures. You're going to have an awful hard time proving that's the time, times, and half a times. And that's when the power of the holy people was completely shattered, because the book of Hebrews starts out teaching you in context that it's passing away in progress, and it ends that way. And everything from front to back is talking about the law passing Present tense. Passing away. Let me say something about that real quick, and then we'll close. It's not that there were two laws. It's one law. Okay? So you had the law. When? From the beginning in the garden. In Genesis 3, the proto-evangelium. The gospel is being preached. The gospel was being preached from day one. How long did it take for it to come to its fruition? Well, there are those today who are saying, well, it's still ongoing. The gospel hasn't been fully preached. When Paul clearly said that it was preached. Had went to every nation. Ephesians 1:26, I think. Hey, I'm not the one that said it. The Spirit led great men who did great things to record that for us. Okay, so I didn't even get to cover the victory. I want to do that briefly, okay? So this victory is what preterism is all about. This is a victory that futurism cannot and will not ever be able to teach. Ever. 1 Corinthians 15 says that the victory happens when Jesus puts down all rule. Was he not victorious when he came? Is Jesus not victorious yet? Believe it or not, there are people who say, yes, he's not victorious. Really? 2 Timothy 1:10 says that he abolished death. Is that not victory? And it can't be physical death. And it's talking about it in this as I recall, it would be the aorist tense. I'd have to look at that. It's like it's already happened. It's as good as happening. It's the prolepsis. He abolished it. He began the process by defeating Sheol, Romans 6. And we could go on and on and on, but the fact remains is we teach victory. And we teach living in that victory now. That's what we teach. Yet the problem is nobody else is teaching it. They're all teaching the victories yet to come. But then they go to church on Sunday morning and they say, victory in Jesus. Well, why would they do such a thing? Why are they saying victory in Jesus on Sunday morning? I can tell you why. Because they don't understand the victory. Well, they understand that there was a victory, and that's good. But they're not sure how to explain it because they see these things and they're going, well, wait a minute. This doesn't make a lot of sense. If Jesus was victorious, then why do I have to be separated from God in Hades? It's a legitimate question, by the way. So why would you have to be separated from God in Hades if Jesus was victorious? You ever think about that? Preterism answers that question. Our brethren cannot answer that question. So anyway, that's it. I'm going to call this quits for the evening. I've stayed my hour. Now it's time to go. Better check on my wife. Make sure she isn't passed out on the floor somewhere. Which would be a very bad thing. So I'm not really making fun of that. Although, I got to gripe about this for a second. Can you believe that there were people on that post, when I said last week or the last couple weeks, who actually took the opportunity at someone else's pain and anguish to try to stab me in the back? And they call themselves Church of Christ preachers. And they call themselves Christians. Boy, that's just low. That is low. You know, all you got to do is say, look, what these is say to illustrate how wrong they are, is just look at what they say. You're not going to find that in the scriptures. It's not Christian-like, not at all. Not at all. It's an evil and a black heart. That's what I have to say about that. Okay, so now I'm gonna close this out here. We're gonna have a little music going on, and we're going to so that lets me know when on my video feeds here when to actually press the stop feeding button. But so anyway, we're going to do that. Hey, I love y'all. And I want you to understand this one thing, that this is all about preaching and teaching the gospel and teaching the truth. And it's about saving people's soul. If you didn't get that from tonight, you can just go back and listen to it again. That's what this is all about. And you got to be in Christ. We talked about that extensively tonight. If you're not in Christ, you can't be in the heavenly. Period. That brings up a whole new dilemma for the amillennialist. Anyway, that's it. I'm out of here. Love y'all. We'll see you next week, Lord willing. Keep my wife in your prayers. I would certainly appreciate that. And also keep Brother Scott Clafton in your prayers and be in prayer that the debate that we are trying to undertake will come through. I have been tasked to find a place for this. Wow. So I'll do the best that I can. I have no idea where I'm looking at, or even, I might schedule or reserve a place that's 100 miles away accidentally. I don't know. I'll give it a shot though. Okay, love you. We will see you next week. I love this song. I play it a lot, but I love it. It's pretty good. Rise among us, let the praises of the King. Rise among us, let it rise, let it rise. Let the songs of the Lord rise among us. Let the songs of the Lord rise among us. Let the joy of the King rise among us, let it rise, let it rise. Wow, listen to that bass line. Love it. Let it rise. Let it rise. Let the glory of the Lord rise among us. Let the glory of the Lord rise among us. Let the praises of the King rise among us. Let it rise, let it rise. Let the songs of the Lord rise among us. Let the songs of the Lord rise among us. Let the joy of the King rise among us. Let it rise, let it rise. Oh, let it rise. Let it rise. Oh, let it rise. Let it rise. Let the glory of the Lord rise among us. Let the glory of the Lord rise among us. Let the praises of the King rise among us. Let it rise, let it rise. Oh, let it rise.